Welcome in. Ready to dive into something a little different today. We're tackling an area of academic study that, frankly, doesn't get enough attention writing in the Middle East and North Africa.
Right, the Mennonite region.
Exactly. We'll be digging into the research, the academic papers, trying to uncover what makes writing in this region so unique, especially in those academic settings.
And it's really fascinating stuff, because what often gets missed is how much of what we think we know about writing studies, it comes from a very Western perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we have all these assumptions about what makes good writing, about how to teach it effectively, even just what it means to be a student.
Right, right.
But the Mennonite region, it challenges a lot of those norms in ways that I think are really, really interesting.
So just to clarify for our listeners, we're not just talking about like the mechanics of translating texts, right? From Arabic to English, for example.
No, no, not at all.
It's going to be deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's really about fundamental differences in how writing is understood, how it's used, how it's taught, even how it's valued.
That's interesting.
One study we'll get into, it actually found that if you just try to take those English-based teaching methods and plop them into the MENA region, you're going to run into a whole lot of misunderstandings.
Yeah, I can imagine. Different cultural context, different expectations.
Precisely. And we actually have a perfect example of this, a partnership between some universities in the U.S. and Kurdistan.
Okay, now this sounds like a recipe for things to go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. And at first they did. The whole goal was to help this Kurdish university revamp their English department curriculum, get them up to speed with, modern teaching methods.
Right, right. The best of intentions.
Exactly. But the thing is, the U.S. faculty, they came in with a very westernized approach.
Yeah.
And there was immediate pushback from the Kurdish faculty who were like, hold on, this isn't going to work for our students, for our cultural context.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about cultural differences all the time, but
Hmm.
this is a case where those differences are playing out in a very real, very concrete way. How you structure education, how you approach something as fundamental as writing.
It's huge. And thankfully, both sides were willing to listen, to really hear each other out.
Yeah.
So this resistance from the Kurdish faculty, it sparked this really important conversation about respecting local pedagogical practices.
Because I imagine the U.S. faculty, they probably hadn't considered how deeply ingrained certain teaching styles might be in the Kurdish context.
That's exactly it. They were coming in with this idea of here's the best way to teach writing without really understanding that best is relative.
Right. It's subjective. It depends on your values, your goals.
Absolutely. So you had this clash, but what's amazing is that it ultimately led to this much richer, more insightful collaboration.
It's like sometimes you need that initial friction to spark something really meaningful.
I think so because the U.S. faculty, they realized they weren't there to impose a system, but to learn exactly, to take their expertise and figure out how to make it work in this new environment with all its complexities and nuances.
Which is a good reminder for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Even with the best of intentions, these cross-cultural partnerships, they require a lot of self-awareness, humility, a willingness to really listen.
Huge. It's not just about responding, it's about understanding.
And it sounds like in this case, that understanding really paid off.
Yeah.
So did this new approach, did it actually translate to a different way of teaching writing?
Oh, it did. They started incorporating all sorts of interactive learning activities that really resonated with the Kurdish students' cultural norms.
Interesting. Like what, give me an example.
Well, for example, instead of just having students write individual essays, they started doing a lot more group work, collaborative projects.
Which makes sense, right? If you have a culture that values collective effort, community.
Absolutely. And this collaborative approach, which remember came directly out of that initial resistance, it ended up leading to some really innovative teaching methods that they probably wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
That's so cool. It's a great example of how respecting cultural differences in education can actually lead to better, more effective teaching overall.
Yeah, it's not about one being right and one being wrong. It's about finding what works.
What works for the students, for the context.
And speaking of different approaches, we also came across some research on the specific challenges of teaching writing in English medium institutions in the MENA region.
You know, I have to admit, I didn't realize how common that was. How many universities there primarily teach in English.
It's becoming increasingly prevalent, which on the one hand creates all these opportunities for students to engage with global scholarship.
Right, to connect with a wider academic community.
Exactly. But it also adds these layers of complexity when you're trying to teach something as nuanced as writing.
Right, it's one thing to learn the rules of a language, but it's another thing entirely to be able to write effectively within that language.
And that's where those cultural differences we were talking about, they really come into play.
So it's not just about grammar and vocabulary lists anymore. It's about something much deeper.
Much deeper. And one of the biggest challenges that kept coming up in the research was this potential for misunderstanding when it comes to expectations around teaching and learning.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, so for example, in some MENA cultures, there's a strong emphasis on memorization and rote learning,
Okay.
which, if you think about it, can clash pretty hard with a more Western pedagogical approach that prioritizes critical thinking and independent analysis.
Oh, totally. Like, a student might be amazing at reciting facts or definitions from a textbook,
Exactly.
but then struggle when it comes to writing an analytical essay that requires them to form their own arguments.
Even if their English language skills are perfectly fine. Because it's not about the language necessarily, it's about the approach to knowledge, to thinking.
Right, those deeper cultural assumptions about how we learn and what constitutes good academic work.
And then you have the added layer of plagiarism, which gets really interesting.
Yeah, that's always a tricky one.
Because in some cultures, the idea of borrowing heavily from respected sources, it's not seen as a bad thing.
It's almost like a sign of respect, right? You're showing that you've studied the greats.
Exactly. But then in a Western academic context, that can get you into a lot of trouble.
It's that whole idea of what's common knowledge versus what needs to be cited, which, when you think about it, is very culturally specific.
Totally. So you can see how all these differences, they can lead to so much confusion, frustration, miscommunication between instructors and students.
Oh, absolutely. And it highlights the need for instructors to be trained, to be equipped with not just pedagogical strategies, but also cultural sensitivity.
Right, because you can't just throw a textbook at the problem and hope for the best.
It's about bridging those gaps, meeting students where they are.
And one of the recommendations that came up a lot in the research was that universities need to provide more extensive training for their faculty members, and not just in the English department.
Interesting. So across the board.
Across the board, because the thinking is, you can't just assume that students will magically develop strong writing skills from a few required composition courses.
Right. They need that guidance, that feedback in every subject.
Exactly. And it's about making those expectations clear to the students from the start, especially for those coming from educational systems where writing might not be emphasized as much.
Transparency is key, right? Setting those expectations early on can prevent so much frustration down the line.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about what happens within the classroom either.
Oh, right. There's that whole other layer of institutional factors to consider.
Exactly. Because you can have the best curriculum in the world, but if it's not supported by the broader system, it's not going to be as effective.
So we're talking about things like national assessment systems, societal expectations, even just the availability of resources.
It's the whole ecosystem, right? You can't just focus on one piece without considering how it interacts with everything else.
And that's where things can get really complicated, especially when you have these Western writing pedagogies being implemented in MENA countries.
Oh, absolutely. And we actually have two really interesting case studies to illustrate this point: Egypt and Bahrain.
Okay, let's start with Egypt. What happened there?
Well, what's fascinating about Egypt is that they actually embraced a lot of those US-style writing programs, which, on the surface seems very Western.
Right. You'd think there would be more pushback, more of a clash.
You would, but what the research suggests is that the emphasis on English language skills, especially in this increasingly globalized job market, it made the program really appealing to a lot of students.
So it was a case where those external influences, even if they were unintentional, they ended up being locally beneficial.
In a way, yeah, it's like this happy accident.
Interesting. But then Bahrain, it sounds like that story is a bit different.
Yeah, in Bahrain, the government, they were really gung-ho about this approach called communicative language teaching.
Okay, and that is?
It's all about emphasizing real-life communication skills,
Yeah.
being able to actually use the language in practical situations.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a good thing.
Right. It's all the rage in a lot of places, and it's been really successful in some contexts.
So what happened in Bahrain? Why didn't it quite work out as planned?
Well, it seems like there was this disconnect, a gap between the government's vision for the program and the realities on the ground.
What do you mean?
Well, a lot of teachers, they were hesitant to fully embrace these new methods.
Why is that? Were they not properly trained?
It's possible, but it also seems like the methods themselves, they clashed with more traditional understandings of education in Bahrain.
Interesting. So it's almost like you have this time lag
Yeah.
between the policy changes, which happen on paper,
Yeah.
and then the actual shifts in these deeply ingrained social and cultural norms.
Exactly. And that tension, it plays out in the classroom.
Of course, because the teachers are caught in the middle. Right.
They're trying to implement these top-down reforms, but at the same time, they're also trying to respond to the immediate needs and expectations of their students, their communities.
Which makes sense because those teachers, they're embedded in that community. They understand the context in a way that policymakers might not.
Exactly. And so you have this situation where what looks good in theory, it doesn't always translate smoothly into practice.
Which is, I think, a really important reminder, especially when we're talking about something as fundamental as education.
Right. It's not just about implementing programs. It's about understanding the people, the culture, the values.
Because those things, they're so deeply intertwined with how we teach, how we learn, how we communicate.
And this is exactly what makes studying writing in the MENA region so fascinating, because it forces us to complicate these narratives, you know?
To move away from those simplistic ideas of right versus wrong approaches.
Right. It's about embracing the messiness, the complexities of cultural context.
And realizing that what works in one place might not work in another.
And that's okay. It's about being adaptable, being responsive to the needs of the learners.
Which ultimately leads to more effective teaching, more meaningful learning.
Absolutely. And speaking of learners, I think it's important to loop back to the students for a moment, because one theme that kept popping up in the research was this idea of student voice and how, especially in academic writing, there's this constant tension between expressing your own ideas, your own unique perspective, and conforming to these conventions of scholarly discourse.
Oh, absolutely. Like trying to find that balance between sounding like yourself and sounding smart.
It's tough, and it's especially relevant in the context of the MENA region, where students might be navigating multiple cultural influences and expectations at the same time.
Right. So they're not just trying to master the mechanics of academic writing in English, let's say.
Right.
They're also trying to figure out where their own voice fits within that structure, a structure that might feel foreign or even at odds with their own cultural background.
Exactly, and this is where the concept of rhetorical moves becomes really interesting.
Okay, before we get too far down that road, can we define rhetorical moves for our listeners? Because I'm not sure everyone's familiar with that term.
Well, you're right. It's one of those academic-y terms that we toss around without always explaining.
Right, right.
So basically, rhetorical moves are these strategic choices that writers make to achieve specific effects in their writing.
Okay, so it's not just about what you're saying,
Right.
but how you're saying it and why you're saying it that way.
Exactly. Think of them like tools in a writer's toolbox. Things like using evidence to support your claims, acknowledging opposing viewpoints, appealing to emotions, using vivid imagery.
Oh, okay, so it's about being intentional, purposeful with your language choices.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that these rhetorical moves, they can look very different across cultures.
Oh, that makes sense because what might be considered persuasive or credible in one culture might fall flat in another.
Totally. And so when you have students coming from different cultural backgrounds, it's important to be aware of these differences and how rhetoric is understood and used.
Because otherwise, you might misinterpret a student's writing, right? You might think they're not making a strong argument, when in reality, they're just using rhetorical strategies that are unfamiliar to you.
Precisely. And this is something that one study we looked at explored in depth. They were looking at how the concept of voice is taught and perceived in writing classrooms in Lebanon.
Interesting. And what did they find?
Well, one of the big takeaways was that simply telling students to find their voice, it wasn't enough.
No surprise there, because that's such vague advice.
It is, and a lot of the students in the study, they felt like they were walking a tightrope, trying to balance their own perspectives with the expectations of academic discourse.
And often feeling like they were failing on both counts.
Exactly, because they're trying to sound smart,
Yeah.
but then it comes out sounding clunky or unnatural.
Right, like you're trying to force yourself into this box that doesn't quite fit.
Exactly, and that's where explicitly teaching those rhetorical moves can be so helpful.
Because it gives students the tools to navigate that dance floor of academic writing.
Exactly. It's about helping them understand that they can express their own ideas, their own unique perspectives, but they have to do it in a way that resonates within that particular academic conversation.
So it's not just about what you think, it's about understanding the rules of the game, so to speak.
Right. And once you understand the rules, you can start bending them, breaking them, making them your own.
That's where the real creativity comes in, right?
Exactly. but you have to have that foundation first.
So did this study offer any suggestions for how instructors can help students develop this awareness of rhetorical moves?
Yeah, and it's actually pretty straightforward. One of the key recommendations was to make those rhetorical moves explicit.
Meaning?
So instead of just saying, oh, I love your voice in this essay, which is nice, but not super helpful,
Right, it's very general.
instructors can point out the specific choices the student made that contributed to that effect.
Oh, so it's about giving concrete feedback.
Exactly. So instead of just saying, your argument is really persuasive, you might say, the way you structured your argument, starting with the counterargument and then dismantling it point by point, that was really effective.
Oh, I see. So you're calling attention to this specific rhetorical move.
Exactly. Or you might say, the way you use that personal anecdote in the introduction, that really drew me in and made me care about the topic.
It's almost like a director giving feedback to an actor, right? Like, I love how you use that pause to create suspense.
Exactly. And the idea is that by pointing out these moves, students start to see them not as these arbitrary rules.
Right. Not just things that English teachers make up to torture them.
Right. But as deliberate choices they can make to craft their own arguments, to express their own perspectives in a way that's both authentic and effective.
It's about giving them agency, right? Empowering them to become more strategic writers.
Exactly. And when students feel empowered, they write with more confidence, their voices come through more clearly, and their writing becomes more impactful.
It's a win-win. And, this whole discussion about voice and rhetorical moves, it really highlights something important about language itself.
What's that?
That it's not just this neutral tool for communication.
Right.
It's this powerful force that shapes how we think, how we learn, how we interact with the world.
Absolutely. And that's especially true in the MENA region, where language policy, particularly in education, plays such a critical role in shaping the writing landscape.
Because you have this constant tension, right, between promoting local languages and cultures
Right.
and recognizing the importance of global languages like English in this increasingly interconnected world.
It's a balancing act for sure, and one that not every country gets right.
So how do you find that balance?
Well, the research we looked at, it really emphasized the need for a more nuanced approach, one that recognizes the value of both.
Okay, so it's not about choosing one or the other.
No, it's about finding ways for them to coexist, to enrich each other, rather than competing for dominance.
It's like that idea of languages as bridges, not barriers.
Exactly. And this is especially important in a region as diverse as the MENA, where being able to communicate across languages and cultures is essential.
Absolutely. And not just for practical reasons, but for building understanding, breaking down stereotypes.
Exactly. And, one paper we looked at, it actually argued that embracing multilingualism could play a huge role in fostering greater cross-cultural understanding and even peace building in the region.
Wow, that's a powerful thought.
It is. It suggests that something as simple as learning another language can have these far-reaching ripple effects.
It's that idea that language can be a tool for connection, for empathy.
Precisely. And of course, language planning is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to creating more equitable and inclusive learning environments.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But it's a conversation worth having, and one that we need to be having more often, especially as the world becomes increasingly interconnected. And that takes us to language planning, which I know might not sound like the most exciting topic. Yeah, but it's actually really important because it's about making conscious decisions about language use.
So instead of just letting language evolve naturally,
Right.
it's about being intentional, about saying, okay, how do we want to support, how do we want to promote certain languages within our schools, for instance?
Exactly. And this is especially crucial in the MENA region because you have such a diverse mix of languages, each with its own history, its own cultural weight.
Right. You might have a country where Arabic is the official language, but then French or English are widely used in higher education.
Or in certain industries, government.
Exactly. So it creates these really interesting dynamics, especially for students who are navigating all these different languages on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And one paper we looked at, it really highlighted the potential benefits of promoting multilingualism in the MENA region.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So the basic idea is that instead of seeing these languages as competing with each other,
Right, like it's a zero-sum game.
exactly, we can encourage students to become proficient in multiple languages.
Which has all sorts of benefits, right? Cognitively, culturally, even professionally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. If you can speak multiple languages, you have access to so much more information, so many more perspectives.
You can communicate with more people,
Yeah.
participate in different cultural experiences.
Exactly. And the paper even argued that this embrace of multilingualism, it could actually contribute to greater cross-cultural understanding and even peace building in the region.
Wow, that's a powerful idea.
It is, right. This idea that something as seemingly simple as learning another language could have these ripple effects.
It's like that saying, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart.
I love that. And it really speaks to the power of language, how it can connect us, how it can break down barriers.
Absolutely. But of course, language planning is just one aspect of creating those equitable learning environments we've been talking about.
Right, it's a piece of the puzzle.
And speaking of equity, one of the things that struck me in the research was how much emphasis was placed on student background knowledge.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. And I think it's something that often gets overlooked.
Because we tend to think of students as these empty vessels, right?
Mhm.
Just waiting to be filled with knowledge.
Right, like blank slates.
Exactly. But the reality is, every student comes into the classroom with their own unique set of experiences, their own cultural assumptions, their own prior knowledge.
All of which shapes how they approach learning, how they engage with the material, and especially how they write.
And this is particularly important in the MENA region, wouldn't you say?
Wow.
Where students might come from incredibly diverse backgrounds,
Mm.
linguistically, culturally, religiously.
Absolutely. And one study we looked at, it really highlighted how these differences in background knowledge can manifest in student writing.
Okay, so give me an example. How does this actually play out in the classroom?
Okay, so imagine you're a teacher and you ask your students to write an essay about, say, the impact of globalization. Yeah. A student who grew up in a very cosmopolitan city, they might have all sorts of experiences to draw on, right? They've seen firsthand how globalization has shaped their world.
They've interacted with people from different cultures. They're exposed to different ideas and perspectives.
Exactly. Whereas a student who grew up in a more rural area, their experience of globalization might be very different.
Right. They might not have had the same exposure to different cultures, different ways of life.
Exactly. And so their essay is going to reflect that, even if they're both perfectly capable writers.
It's like giving two chefs the same ingredients, but they're going to come up with totally different dishes.
I love that analogy because it's not about one being better than the other. It's just different.
Different perspectives, different experiences.
And the study emphasized that instructors need to be aware of these differences to provide support to help students bridge those gaps.
So it's not just about teaching them how to write.
Right.
It's also about giving them the tools and information they need to write effectively about the subject matter.
Exactly. And that might mean providing them with more background information, doing some pre-writing activities to activate their prior knowledge.
Things like brainstorming, concept mapping, even just having a discussion about the topic to see what students already know, what they don't know.
Exactly. It's about creating a more level playing field so that all students have the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their background.
I like that. It's about creating a more inclusive learning environment where everyone feels like their experiences are valued.
Exactly. And this emphasis on student experience, it actually leads us to another really interesting area of research, which is the use of creative writing in the MENA region, specifically performance poetry.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. Performance poetry.
Yeah, it's a form of creative writing that's really taken off in some parts of the MENA region, especially among university students.
Interesting, because when I think of academic writing, performance poetry isn't exactly the first thing that comes to mind.
Right. There's this assumption that academic writing has to be very formal, very objective, very impersonal.
Right, all about logic and reason, not so much about emotion or personal expression.
Exactly. But one study we came across, it looked at the popularity of performance poetry among university students in the United Arab Emirates.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, it turns out that not only were students really drawn to performance poetry as a form of self-expression,
Which makes sense. It's such a powerful, immediate way to connect with an audience.
it is, and it allows students to explore topics and themes that might not be traditionally acceptable in more formal academic settings.
Right, it gives them a space to talk about their own experiences, their own perspectives.
Exactly. But what was really interesting was that the researchers also found that this engagement with performance poetry actually seemed to enhance students' overall writing and communication skills.
Really? How so?
Well, for one thing, performance poetry requires a very high level of linguistic creativity and precision.
Because you have to think about rhythm, you have to think about word choice, imagery, all while crafting a message that's going to resonate with an audience.
Exactly. And the researchers found that this emphasis on language play, on audience engagement, it actually seemed to transfer to students' academic writing as well.
So their writing became more engaging, more
More
persuasive.
creative, more dynamic. It's like this whole other side of their writing was unlocked.
That's fascinating. It really challenges the notion that academic writing has to be this dry, boring
It
thing.
does, right. It suggests that there's room for playfulness, for creativity, even within those seemingly rigid conventions of academic discourse.
It's about recognizing that learning can happen in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most powerful insights emerge when we step outside of our comfort zones and experiment with different forms of expression.
Exactly. And this study on performance poetry, it's just one example of the many ways in which the MENA region is challenging our assumptions about writing, about literacy, about education itself.
It's a good reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to teaching and learning,
Right. What works in one context might not work in another.
and that the most effective strategies are often those that are grounded in a deep understanding of the local context.
And that are responsive to the needs and interests of the learners themselves.
Which brings us back to the heart of this whole discussion, right?
Hmm.
How can we create more inclusive and equitable learning environments for all students?
Exactly. And that's a question we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the MENA region's fascinating and complex writing landscape.
It's been really eye-opening to see how all these different threads we've been following, they all kind of lead back to this same conclusion.
What's that?
This need for a much deeper, more nuanced understanding of the MENA region's relationship with writing.
It's not a monolith, right?
Exactly. And I think for too long, the field of writing studies, it's kind of viewed the region through this very narrow lens.
Assuming that what works in the West will automatically work everywhere else?
Right, which is just not true. And it's a real disservice, I think, not just to scholars and educators in the MENA region.
But to the field as a whole.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because we're missing out on all these valuable insights, all these different perspectives.
And different approaches, different ways of thinking about writing, about literacy itself.
It's like we were saying earlier about those different cultural understandings of rhetoric.
Right. What's considered persuasive, what's considered appropriate, it can vary widely from one culture to the next.
And if we're not aware of those differences, we're bound to misinterpret, to misjudge.
And ultimately, to miss out on the richness and complexity of human communication.
Exactly. And, it makes you wonder, how can we start to shift this perspective? How can we create more inclusive spaces within writing studies? Spaces that genuinely value and incorporate the voices and experiences of those working and learning in the MENA region.
It's a big question, and I don't think there's one easy answer.
Of course not.
But I do think it starts with a fundamental shift in how we approach the study of writing itself.
So moving away from this idea of a universal standard.
Yes, it's letting go of this notion that there's one right way to write, one right way to teach writing.
Because those standards, they're often steeped in Western assumptions and biases.
Exactly. So it's about being more critical of those assumptions, being more aware of our own biases.
And being more open to different ways of knowing, different ways of expressing knowledge.
And I think that starts with actively seeking out the work of scholars and educators from the MENA region.
Giving them a platform, amplifying their voices.
Exactly. Inviting them to share their research, their pedagogical approaches, their lived experiences.
Because those voices, they're out there.
Oh, absolutely.
We just need to create more spaces for them to be heard.
And not just within academia, but in broader public discourse as well.
Right, because these conversations, they have implications beyond the ivory tower.
Absolutely. And then I think it's also about looking at our curricula, at our teaching practices.
Making sure they're truly inclusive and culturally responsive.
And that doesn't mean just throwing in a few token readings by MENA authors.
It's about really grappling with those texts, understanding the context in which they were written, the perspectives they represent.
And most importantly, creating space for students to engage with those different perspectives, to challenge their own assumptions.
To broaden their understanding of what writing can be, what it can do.
Exactly. And I think that's where collaboration becomes so crucial.
Collaboration.
Yeah, building those bridges between scholars from different cultural backgrounds, creating opportunities for exchange, for dialogue.
So that we can learn from each other, challenge each other, grow together.
Precisely. And I really believe that by embracing this spirit of openness, of curiosity,
we can create a much richer, more vibrant field of writing studies.
One that truly reflects the diversity of human thought and expression.
That's a powerful vision, and is one that I think we can all aspire to, regardless of where we come from, what languages we speak, or what cultural traditions we carry with us.
Absolutely. We all have something unique to contribute to this conversation.
And by listening to each other, by learning from each other,
We can all become more effective and insightful writers and thinkers.
and isn't that what it's all about?
It is. It's about using language to connect, to understand, to build bridges instead of walls.
What I said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder.
How can we, as individuals and as a society, challenge our own assumptions about writing and create more equitable spaces for all voices to be heard?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the MENA region's writing landscape. We'll see you next time when we take another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic.